Okay, well, welcome everyone for our monthly meeting of the task force. It's great to see everyone here tonight. We have a full agenda, but I think we can get things done. Before we get started, just a note about our situation this particular week, a very sad situation all around that you may have read about regarding Montgomery County Police. Earlier this week, a man in Florida attacked and killed his former girlfriend in front of her 4 children. The man fled to Maryland, where he was, Montgomery County Police were chasing after him and identified him. As they approached, he started firing at them, which resulted in a gunfight. The assailant was killed. A Montgomery County detective, Donnie Oakes, was shot and wounded. He was taken to the hospital, had surgeries, reported to be in stable condition tonight. So our thoughts go out to Detective Oakes and his family with our best wishes for a speedy recovery. So tonight, as you've seen from the agenda, we're going to be focusing mostly on our 5 focus groups, reports, and updates to see where we're going. I'm very pleased to see that all groups are up and running. Some of them have had several meetings already. A range of issues are already being identified. Just a couple of thoughts on questions that have come up over time. One in particular, people want to know about the recommendations that we will be producing, and there are a number of issues there, and we'll be discussing this as we go along. 2 things here. I think just first to keep in mind that we are about reimagining public safety. So while any recommendations we come up with will be handled in a political world, will be handled in terms of budgetary issues and the like, that's not our problem, basically. Our problem, our task is to come up with the best approach we think we can suggest to the county executive and to the people in this county. So let's just keep that in mind. As we develop recommendations, I think it's also critical that we try to make them evidence-based as much as possible. Evidence-based both in a quantitative and a qualitative sense. We don't want to just say, we think we should adopt this policy and that program because we kind of like them, we think we better, but what issues are they addressing right now? What's working or not working in the county, what could be expanded, what do we know about this? To the extent we have hard data, that's terrific, but we also want to incorporate personal experiences of people with the justice system and the people within the justice system themselves. So let's just try to keep that in mind. I'm going to turn over to Bernice in a moment to lay out what we're trying to accomplish tonight with the reports from the 5 groups. But in general, we want to make this interactive. We want it to be a rich experience among all of us to help each of the groups keep moving along in very productive ways. Bernice and I will sort of alternate moderating among the 5 groups as we go through them. And finally, just to note that we have a hard stop tonight at 7:20. The county has another meeting coming up involving this technology, and they need a few minutes to make the switch over. So whoever is speaking at 7:20, we're going to cut you off, and that'll be that. But I think we'll do fine. So without further ado, Bernice, do you want to focus on this now? Bernice, you're muted.
There we go. Can everyone hear me? Yes, I'm not muted anymore. Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Just wanted to kind of give a brief review of what we're going to be doing tonight. We'll have each of the co-chairs of the 5 focus groups kind of catch us up as to what they've been doing over the last few weeks, with the goal in mind to have them, lay out for all of us their goals of the focus groups, what outcome they want to see happen out of their focus groups, and their discussion schedule, basically kind of laying out what are the issues they're going to address between now and the time they draft recommendations and produce the final product. So some groups are further along than others, and that's fine, but we're all here to kind of support each other, even though we're not all course, in the same groups together, we believe that having everyone speak from the focus groups together as a group, we can kind of help each other out in terms of making sure we're on track in each of the 5 focus areas. So with that, I'm going to just kick off the conversation and let, I just want to make sure I see them, let the co-chairs of Group 1 kick us off as to their update on 301, 911 calls. I'm just looking, actually I'm looking through the list to see if our co-chairs are on here. Let's see here.
Bernice, I'm here. I don't know if my coach.
There you are. Yes, you are. Okay, wonderful. Take it away, Marco.
Yeah, I don't think my other co-chair is on, but I can just get the ball rolling.
That'd be great.
Yeah, not a problem. So my name is Mark Rivera-Oven. I'm one of the co-chairs for the 311-911. We're, as Bernice said, she sat in on the last meeting. We're a little bit behind as the other groups, but we did have our first meeting a little bit less than a week ago, and it was very good meeting. It was kind of more open. A lot of people have kind of shared their experiences with 311 or 911, and with that, we were able to gather kind of focus points as to what we want to strategize and turn our focus to. So our biggest thing that a lot of people said in the meeting was the language barrier with 311. That was one of our biggest focus points to see. A lot of people had a lot of either representatives that they were representing or just experiences of their own with 311. Also with 911, there was a lot of talk about domestic violence, mental health, and how we can, I guess I can use the word reimagine to see if there's a way to change that system. Dave, I think he's on here. He's been really great. We asked him to get some numbers for our next group and some data regarding how many calls are non-English speaking, since that was a big barrier. But I'm very hopeful for this group. This one's a little bit close and dear to my heart. I deal with a lot of 911 calls. I'm a volunteer firefighter in the county. And also with 311, I have with my other job, a lot of people call 311 to get to me. So I'm very hopeful for this group, a little bit behind than the others, but I'm open to suggestions and strategies. We do have, there was a suggestion to add more time and also more dates. So we will be reaching out to Caroline to add some more dates and to extend the meeting times. Me and my fellow co-chair have sat down and we'll be sending that email as well. But I'm very hopeful. So thank you.
So at this time, we'll open the floor to any feedback, questions anyone has for Group 1. Okay. Looks like they're straight to go. That's good. That's good to hear. Yeah. So it sounds like to me you definitely have a couple goals in mind, but it also seems like you just need more time to work on what is going to be the product you're going to produce. Like what's going to come out of that. And
correct. Yeah, that's kind of what the next the meetings are for, is to basically we do have a lot of ideas, which is great, but the next meetings are more so to structure it a little bit better. Correct. Yes.
Okay. And then your next meeting is that's to be determined, right? You're going to.
The next meeting, we do have a meeting set, but we are going to move up. We're going to add a meeting in between that to meet even sooner. Correct. So the next meeting, we're going to try and do November 30th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
Thank you, Brittany.
You're welcome.
I actually just thought of a question. You may have mentioned it and I just missed it. But I was wondering if you all will be looking into, I guess, the burden of mental health calls and I guess how that plays into, the pull that our police department has to go respond to those.
Yeah, thank you, Brenda, for bringing that up. So that was in our first meeting that was brought up. So we are going to try and at least either give some time or have some time in our agenda for our next meeting to kind of more focus on that. So yes, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, I had a question also. Do you know what kind of training do the 311 and 911 operators get in terms of helping them figure out what to do with calls?
I personally don't know how the training. I don't know if there's somebody else that knows on this call if the exact training that 911 operators or 311 operators get. But myself personally, I sorry, Scott, I cannot personally answer that question. I don't know the exact training that they go through.
And I would believe that might be something that Group 3 could touch upon. I mean, we're going to have a situation where a lot of these focus groups will overlap in terms of what issues come up, which is why we are all coming together tonight and talking to different focus groups to kind of see where there could be some connections. So perhaps, Marco, you can talk to the co-chairs of Group 3 and see, if there's a way to get some more information through their channel tonight. That's just a possibility.
What languages do they speak? And yeah, what languages do they speak in the call center in 311 or 911?
So this is Dave. Hi, hi everyone. In 311, they do have dedicated Spanish-speaking call takers, and for 311 and 911, they utilize it's called generally a language line, which is a service that I think a lot of organizations use it, where if someone calls up and they're limited English proficient, and let's say they speak Vietnamese, then you connect to the language line, a third party, and they have people staffed, at all hours who speak all languages, and then you bring in a translator to be a go-between for the Vietnamese speaker or the Russian speaker or the French speaker, and so on and so forth. So both services use a language line, and that's the kind of data that I'm looking to collect.
Okay, yeah. I was curious, what was the first, was it 311 that you said has those who speak Spanish?
They do. They have a certain number of call takers that are bilingual.
And is that the only language where they have someone who is fluent in speaking a language?
Within the call center itself, yes.
Okay, so no Amharic or Chinese or...
That's correct. And I will say, and this is not a judgment in any way. In my own experience of doing countywide surveys of residents and looking at, and when we offer up opportunities for people to engage in other languages, this says nothing about those people, because it might be pure awareness or maybe lack of interest. The numbers of people that opt to engage in a language other than English and Spanish, and to some extent Chinese, are extraordinarily low. Just to let you know, so shockingly low for when I look at across the kinds of services that we deliver as a county and the residents who live here.
I see. I'm wondering though if that could be a chicken and the egg kind of thing, because if someone is trying to communicate and there's not someone who can fluently communicate in that person's own language, it's really hard to say, if people just aren't calling in because there's not a need or if there's just not the resources. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Karen, so Karen, that's a as I said before, that was our biggest thing that we talked about at our first meeting was literally language barrier with 311. So we're going to really dive into that more. As Dave just said, there is Spanish speaker dedication, but obviously there's a lot more languages in Montgomery County that are spoken. So that's what we're going to try and dive into to figure out exactly, like you just said, if they're just not calling because they're not being understood or if it's something else. Yeah.
I'm just curious, how would you be able to determine that? Because I'm thinking another possible factor may be trust. There are some folks that are not trusting of the police or government that may not call in. So how are you going to be able to figure that out? What the motives or underlying issues truly are? Seems like that would be difficult just unless you did a survey or something.
Well, that's why we're having these conversations. I mean, to brainstorm tools that Marco and the rest of the group can kind of find, if they even exist, to answer those questions. So, Karen, you make a really great points for Group 1 to consider. I think we are approaching the mark. We're going to move on.
Can I ask a question?
Only because
It's okay if you're moving on. That's okay.
Yeah, because we're trying to make sure we get everyone in before 7:20. So, but yeah, definitely reach Marco and the other co-chair by email or shoot
I'm in that
Task
group.
Force an
That's
email, and we'll have those conversations. So, Mark, go ahead.
And Bernice?
I'm sorry,
Caroline, sorry. We do have our consultant, Effective Law for Enforcement, on the line supporting us as well. So, Katie, I think that was you that said that you had a question. And also for anyone else, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box because we are tracking them as well. You can send them to the Reimagine Task Force email address. If we do not have time to get to your questions tonight, we will make sure that we forward them to the respective focus groups so there can be a follow-up to your question.
Right, exactly. Thank you, Carol.
Okay, thanks. So focus group number 2 is the police department budget and operations, and the co-chairs, Brenda Akinagbe and Max Sokol, and I see both of them on the screen. So if you want to take it away, please.
Yeah, I'll get us started, and then I'm sure Brenda will be able to jump in with more. Our focus group has met twice, had good conversations, and I think we're starting to move towards our report content. I'm excited about that. We spent our first meeting just reviewing kind of our charge from the committee, the facilitation guide that we all received. And we made a couple of mostly cosmetic changes, just helping us understand exactly what our role would be. So we're excited to be able to review the police budget and the structure of the department and suggest any changes to either of those things that seem appropriate from the perspective of fostering racial equity, which we understand to be the goal of this task force. For our second meeting, which we had just last night, we gathered to review the findings of the county's Office of Legislative Oversight reporting on police activity in the county. We mostly focused on the most recent report, which is from this past July, which was developed to aid this Reimagine process. From there, what we're hoping to do is develop our own sort of version, a suitably sized version of racial equity impact assessment tool based on what the county already uses and outside groups like Race Forward that the county has also turned to for guidance in developing racial equity assessments to look at areas of police activity that we think will be relevant to any kind of like deeper dive we want to do in the budget. One thing we've sort of been discussing is that the police budget is a complex document. It's more than 3,000 budget lines, so a line by line review is sort of impractical. So we thought it would make more sense to come at it from an activity standpoint, looking at what the police department is doing, and then matching the appropriate budget lines to those activities, and then from there, developing our recommendations. Another part of our charge is also to hopefully blaze a trail for future community engagement on the police budget. So part of our facilitation guide asks us to develop tools like the ones we're creating and recommendations for how in the future the police budget can be presented or structured in such a way that it's easier for community folks to understand what it all means. And I can definitely say that we've got some ideas cooking on that front too, just from our own engagement with it to date. So that's a short summary. I don't have our meeting dates right in front of me, but I think we're meeting pretty much every week at this point. And we are on a 5 meeting or maybe a 6 meeting schedule. So hoping to have our final recommendations drawn up in time for the task force deadline.
And just to add on, I think what's been really helpful for us, because like Max mentioned, the current fiscal year 21 budget is already at over 3,000 budget items, was really pulling from that OLO report because like Mark mentioned, we really do want to make the recommendations evidence-based. And a lot of what's in that OLO report deals with our local county data. And it also, is, I guess, reminds me of another OLO report where we're looking at racial equity in government decision-making. And there's case studies about what other jurisdictions throughout the country are doing to try to improve racial equity across different public safety programs like police departments. So those reports were sent out to the different co-chairs. And I think it's a great springboard, not only for our subgroup, but for actually all of the subgroups to look at. And what's also really nice about the reports is that, of course, they have their citations in there as well. So if you're looking for more information on any particular subjects, you can kind of look through that and, go down your rabbit hole and see what additional evidence you might be able to find to support your recommendations.
Okay, thanks very much, both of you. So questions and comments and issues about their agenda in focus group number 2? The items?
I was actually just hoping to see if there's a way I can get data on how our school resource officers interact with students, because I know that that's something that has come up throughout different reports as a potential, factor in increasing racial equity. I hear that there was a meeting maybe a couple of days ago, but I don't know too much about it. So if I can get a breakdown of what students, what the interactions are like, what the outcomes like, that would be very helpful for us doing the racial equity impact assessment on that particular budget item.
Caroline, do you want to respond to that?
We got that request noted. We'll follow up.
Thank you.
Okay. And there are, I guess you might say, several balls in the air in terms of school resource officers, the county council and the school system itself, as well as whatever we want to explore through the task force also. So the issues are out there in different ways right now.
I have a question.
Karen?
Thanks, Mark. So I'm kind of curious, the Reimagining Public Safety Resident Survey has gone out and it's been extended until Friday, till tomorrow. What I'm wondering is there going to be an opportunity, based on the timeliness of everything, for us to review that information? Because I think that has some relevance in what their particular group is reviewing.
No, very much so. And actually, Caroline is going to be giving an overview of where that stands right now and what the process looks like. So it's a very appropriate question. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Karen looked ahead on the agenda, but the short answer to that is yes, Karen. Once we analyze the responses, there was a portion that allowed respondents to provide feedback to the specific focus areas. Our goal is to gather those responses and send them over to the focus areas, to the co-chairs, and the focus group can review those and decide how they want to act on those particular feedback.
I appreciate that. The questions were very specific, and I thought that there was some alignment with what we were doing intentionally, so I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Other questions and comments for group 2? Yeah, it's a tall order they have, as Brenda noted, 3,000 line items in the budget. So trying to work through that and come up with a sense of, what is currently happening. And, it's easier said than done to take money out of one budget line and put it someplace else or so. But again, we're trying to take some big picture stuff and look at overall operations and come to some general conclusions about where we want to be going. So unless there's any other questions, I think, Bernice, we can move on to group 3 now.
Great. So group 3 is police department training and programs, and Maria Lynn and Chris are the co-chairs of that group. And I believe they're on here. I just don't see them immediately on my screen, but one of them can get started on providing us their update. Yeah, I see Chris on here. Let's see. Chris, are you able to hear us?
Had a small break. Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Looks like we're having some technical issues with you, Chris.
Can you hear me? Bernice?
Now we can. Yes. Are you there, Chris?
You're not hearing.
Yeah, I think we're having technical issues. I don't see Maria Lynn in here right now. So I think.
Yeah, I don't see Marilyn. So Bernice, if we want to jump to 4 and then come back.
That's what we'll do. Okay, that's what we'll do. 4 is alternate programs, and we have Bishop and
if you guys can hear me.
Yes, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So hi, Edmund Morris, one of the co-chairs for Group 4 Alternatives. We have a lot of programs in the county that are intended as diversionary or alternatives or some preventive ones. So because we only have a few weeks, instead of trying to do actual evaluations, our group has decided that we're going to take a high-level view of them to see if there are any characteristics of some of the existing programs that the other programs might benefit from, and to try and identify ways to help weave these disparate programs that are very specifically targeted into a more cohesive ecosystem. But as was mentioned earlier in the chat, one of the problems is that there's a lack of some of the data that we want. For example, eligibility information is only kind of available for some of them. Data on the demographics of who gets referred or the decision criteria are a little bit hazy. But also there's a lack of a lot of qualitative data, so one of our recommendations is likely to have to do with the way that the county not only approves these programs, but how they evaluate them and the type of data they collect on them, so that we can try and get a better picture of, is this a system or is this a series of pot shots to troubleshoot very specific problems without ever really connecting all of them together. Also, right, for meetings, we will be having our 4th meeting next week. We'll be meeting Wednesdays through the rest of the year, give or take a week, I believe, to try and go over each of the programs or some of the major programs available at each of the intercepts. The last 2 weeks have been very lively and very enlightening, talking about Intercept 0. That's the pre-police portion, where it's just community services. We discovered that there are a lot of really interesting and promising youth programs added and overseen by one of our group members, but there seems to be a little bit of a dearth of things for those over the age of 18 and even less for those over 24 that are wraparound services, so that may be an area of focus going forward. We will be looking at the alternatives to police being the first line of intervention next week, and had already discussed with maybe doing a little collaboration with Group 5. I believe they're looking at social services and best practices. That's correct. To see if there might be some space for overlap there. But if anyone happens to have any brilliant ideas or programs that they've encountered or information that they've seen that says, well, we have this opportunity or this option that seems not to be getting exercised, we're always open for more information. So I guess we can go from that to questions, comments.
Sure. So let's open it up now for issues related to the alternatives programs.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Chris. Do you have a question related to Group 4's?
Nope, I fixed my technical issues, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, all right. So I figured as much. We're on Group 4 right now. I'm going to jump back to you in a minute, Chris, okay? All right.
Understood.
Go ahead, Mark.
Edmund, I'm just curious, how are the sort of programs and services cataloged? Do you have to hunt around and find them individually, or is there a good database already that exists to identify what we might want to be looking at?
So what we've been doing is we've been relying on the work group report that was made available to the task force at the beginning of this, and starting with going down that list of programs, because there does not seem to be a cohesive database of them anywhere. That's also on our list of questions of, well, does anyone actually keep track of all of these? But that's where we've started, and then many of the people involved in our work group have had some research familiarity or tangential experience with other alternatives that we've been bringing to the table and discussing as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, are you all looking at any kind of restorative justice programs?
That is one of our, it's on the agenda for a little bit later. We haven't gotten to the intercepts where it's dealing with someone after having made an offense, but we were planning on doing so in a couple of weeks, yes.
As a follow-up, you mentioned that you have that on your schedule for a couple weeks. Do you have an idea of what the rest of your discussion schedule is going to look like?
We are doing an intercept per week after our 2 weeks on Intercept Zero, so we'll be doing police as an intervention next week. So that'll be things like the CAHOOTS program and mobile crisis units as alternatives to just sending out officers. The week after that will be initial detention and the sort of court sorting bit, so that'll be things like pretrial services. The week following will should be, and so that'll be putting us then the 9th of December, I believe, is going to be the adjudication and sentencing and some of these special court things, so that would be the detainment section. The week after that, which should be the 15th or so of December, is going to be talking about reentry services, and then the 23rd will be discussing once they've served their sentence and are back in the community, but also as if you have someone that has offended, what do we have to keep them from reoffending? So that's where we are for the rest of the year, I believe.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
So a question I've got in terms of program effectiveness, and this, is a national problem, I think. When we look at social services of various kinds, most programs can identify how many clients they met with and what kinds of services they provided and the like. It's much more difficult to really measure actual outcomes, and in large part this is because many of these programs are not well funded, and they certainly don't have funding to have an outside evaluator assess what's going on. So do you have any sense so far of the extent to which we can quantify some of the outcomes, or is it just more qualitative interviews that will give us a sense of what's working there?
I could give you a much longer answer than we have time for that, but the short version, yes, we have a bit of a sense, and since Luis Cardona, who's with HHS and in charge of the Youth Development Services, has already spoken up, I'll use one of the programs that he was talking to us about as an example, the high school wellness programs, wellness centers, where I believe we have 4 of them at the moment, not only conduct intake surveys, but they also conduct exit surveys on a lot of the behaviors and perceptions that they're targeting. And they have in their annual reports, which I've already shared to the work group, I can send to the general task force as well, as an example of what some of that reporting looks like when it's done well. They have a lot of markers as to the change from inception to end of program, as well as qualitative feedback from the students that have participated, in addition to a lot of the wraparound services. So it's the students, their families, and has the community input at the beginning to figure out what services they need, as well as reports on how those services are utilized. So we have examples here in the county of programs that are already working that do this, but we do not have as much robust data for a lot of the other programs that exist. And so we'll be looking to see which programs are doing a good job of reporting that qualitative information and that longevity. But we do run into the minor complication of being able to track further down the line. And this is sort of that ecosystem thing. We have that point in time of intervention, but we don't have data past that. And it does run into kind of a double-edged sword, as anyone that's ever dealt with the school system knows. If you track someone just because they've gotten in trouble or needed services early on, it becomes a precarious thing to continue tracking them in future. And so you may not know whether or not they have benefited long-term from it unless they interact with the system again later. And if there was a way to come up with a convenient measure for that without having to also append additional tracking information, brilliant, but I don't know that we're there yet.
Those are all the right issues, I think, certainly, you've identified. So I'm glad you're on top of those things. Any other questions for Edmund before we turn it over? Okay, Bernice, do you want to move along with back to group 3?
Yeah, Chris, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Group 3 was tasked with de-escalation training, the SRO program, and a few other issues. But for right now, we've met 3 times already, and it was so much in our group that we actually assigned a subcommittee to the subcommittee. So we have 3 other subcommittees that are going to look at police training, police culture, and then the third one slips to my mind. I'm sorry, I don't have my notes. I'm driving right now. That's why you don't see my face. But we wanted to look at, in police culture, was what is the word on the street with the police? So what's their culture like? What are they being groomed to? And that police culture subcommittee ties directly into training, which is, what are they being trained? So training affects culture. So training equals culture always in this instance. So we're taking a look at that. And then on top of that, we're looking at how institutional racism ties into police culture and training. Is it taught? Is it learned? Is it brought from upbringing? Is it brought by training? Is there a secret culture inside the police department? So we just tasked the group with that last week, and we haven't got anything back yet. We're kind of in the middle of getting that information. We're going back and forth right now, so it's a broad aspect of issues. We did meet about non-lethal interventions with Chief Ronald Smith, and he gave us a wide variety of non-lethal weapons and non-lethal intervention tools. So if there's a problem, the person doesn't always have to be shot. So we're looking at that also. We also looked at how the difference between when plainclothes detectives go to talk to someone versus a patrol officer, and we're trying to figure if there's a better way of maybe interacting with the public, via traffic stops, cold stops, crime investigations. So we're looking at that. So we have a wide variety of things that we're looking at. And then, de-escalation ties into training and culture also. So with that, I know it was short and probably all over the place, but if you have any questions, please.
Anyone have any questions or thoughts or feedback?
I can add a little bit.
Sure, Scott.
Yeah, right. I'm working on the police culture subgroup, and a lot of the questions are, if there's misbehavior or people are not following protocols, then what happens? Are there repercussions? Do people feel comfortable speaking up and saying something about that? So it's really important that people be encouraged to report misbehavior and to say something, and should that be done through a third party, so that it's not through the department. We also had a little discussion about whether or not police should ride solo or have 2 people per car, and they said, well, it's not economical to have 2 people per car, but if a person is by themselves in a car, they could get into a jam and perhaps resort to use of force when they shouldn't, or when it's not necessary. And we also, we talked about that as well, and we talked about whether or not they always had to have weapons or not. And of course, their feeling is, well, you never know what's going to happen or what situation you're going to get into. But we think there might be cases where a weapon or carrying a weapon is not necessary. Absolutely. So those are just a couple of issues that we.
Correct, Scott. I think that the reason we looked at non-lethals was, yes, an officer may get into a jam, but is killing the person the only way out of it? So I think that that's what we're looking at, right, Scott?
Yeah, we were told that the department has 400 tasers right now out of 1,300 sworn officers, and that the county and the county executive are committed to trying to increase that number so that more police officers have an alternative to using a lethal weapon.
Yes.
Hi.
Aaron.
Yeah. Hi, Chris. Thanks for sharing this information. Hi. Just to piggyback off, police not using or carrying a lethal weapon. It seems to me also that there are options besides weapons, which is learning the skills to not have to use a weapon, where there are instances where violence is not, the issue or the situation that the police officers walking into. I'm curious to know whether or not there's an over-reliance on weapons as being a solution, which may undermine the ability for there to be training on mediation and talking down situations that could otherwise escalate to a violent situation because of the fact that there's a weapon on a police officer. I think that your task is a challenging one because I see legislation playing a huge role in the effectiveness of what can be done through the repeal and replace of Libra, and also without there being any personal connection or personal loss to any actions that are outside the law by police. I just don't see that as really having a big impact unless there's a performance evaluation that's based on behaviors from the police and, suspension or other ways of handling it, or the police having to pay out of pocket for any expense if there are court issues or loss of life outside of police not following the law. But I think that you have a real challenging task ahead of you, and I think that legislation really is needed in order to have any real impact. That's my my feedback.
Well, to address your first issue, we have the chief of the police department's training division coming to meet with us next Thursday. So those issues that you brought up, they're on our radar, but we want to bring it up to see what they're being trained in first before we can, make a definitive assessment of where to go next. So that was our next steps is, hey, what are they being trained on? What does the book say? Are they following the book? What happens when they don't follow the book? What steps? Why, if an officer has an excessive force complaint, does that disqualify him from training other officers, becoming a training officer, getting promoted? So we're taking a look at all that.
Well, let me ask as a follow-up to Karen's point and your response. So it sounds like to me you guys are doing a lot of just examining the facts, like what's going on out there. And what Karen has offered are a couple possible outcomes out of the conversation. So I guess I'm trying to clarify, at what point are you going to decide, okay, well, out of these conversations with all these people, what do we want our outcome to be? Or is it that you're just looking at the information now, and then after looking at information, you're going to say, okay, this is a potential outcome we can have out of this group? I'm just trying to understand the timeline when everything's going to occur.
So I think by the first week of December, we'll have that. We didn't want to come up with an outcome without looking at what they're being trained. That would kind of be putting the cart before the horse in that aspect, because if we say, hey, this is how we want things to be, but the training contradicts that, then we need to look at the training. But if we look at the training and we say, hey, this is something that needs to be either reinforced or actually needs to be added to the mix, then that's where we're going. So we wanted to hear from the training officer first, and then that'll help better suit our conversation towards what the outcome should be.
Okay.
If that makes any sense. I know it was we didn't want to say, hey, officers shouldn't shoot people for this reason before we hear what they've been trained on, why they shoot them. Because we're trying to come at this objectively. And I think that the objective approach from the group was, I guess there was a agreement among us that we wanted to hear from the training officer first before we started making those recommendations on those outcomes.
Oh, well, I guess I'm kind of thinking of it kind of like a science experiment. Every science experiment needs a hypothesis first and test it out. So to the point about putting the cart before the horse, I don't think it's harmful to say, what if we can get X, Y, Z out there? Now let's talk to all these different people, and then you find out we can't get X, Y, Z done because ABC is better. I think maybe that's something, having something I think tangible to kind of look at and have information to validate or disprove these particular outcomes might be helpful to you to streamline the conversation, so you guys might not feel like you're all over the place, because you all have great topics. I just want to make sure it's going towards an outcome given the timeline that we have. So that's just my general feedback.
So I'll say me and Maria Lynn, we have after this 24th meeting, by the first or second week of December, because we meet almost every week.
Right.
We have 9 meetings because we knew that this was important. By the first or second week of December, we should start popping out recommendations and then fine-tuning them around how do I say this? Have them around the specific areas and them not be so broad. So right now we have broad aspects, ambitions, thoughts, outcomes, as you say, and with the people that we've spoken with, we can be more specific and more deliberate with our recommendations.
Okay.
I have a question for Chris and Scott, if I could. This is Moomin, yeah. Do you also plan on kind of looking at other jurisdictions, other programs, by way of comparing what's done here versus what's done elsewhere? And that may give you some flavor as to which one is better or which way you want to go.
Judith, I hate to put you on the spot, but Judith is our ELE 4A, our guru, and she worked with New Orleans, so we've been kind of asking certain questions in that aspect. So from what she has told us, New Orleans, her work in New Orleans was very, very successful, and it's a comparable department. So I would have to say, if we guide it towards anything, it would be more towards New Orleans, because we do have a subject expert, and since we don't have a lot of time, if we want to compare something to another police department, it would be New Orleans, I would have to say, just as a time-saving mechanism. If we had a year, then yes, maybe we could reach out to other departments, but their success in New Orleans, I think, can help guide us, and it's a quick resource that we can get feedback back and forth with.
Chris, it's Bart. Can I say something about that issue?
Please
sure, because I'm sure they're about to cut us off.
Yeah, after Bart's point, we'll probably have to move on. I think we're running short on time. But go ahead, Bart.
I can't remember the data source, but at a minimum, on the subject of hours devoted to subject matter, we have the data comparing Montgomery County to the national average. So at least on that subject, we have a wealth of data. So we can see, for example, that to just ride my favorite hobby horse, Montgomery County Police receive shockingly many fewer hours of training on responding to domestic violence calls than the national average. There are other subject matters on which they receive, so other subjects on which they receive similar, others on which they receive more. So we have a wealth of comparative data, at least on training hours devoted, and it's broken down into pretty small slices.
Okay, great.
All right. Thanks, Bart, and thank you, Carolyn and Mark, for letting me run overtime too.
Okay. All right. I think we're on group 5 next. Is that right? That's okay. Which is back to me. Okay. Group 5, crisis response. And I think, who do I see on here? Simone and...
Yep, Simone and Carlene. Yeah.
Okay, yes. Yes, go ahead, ladies, take it away.
Caroline, do you want to...
Oh, yes, you had the
power. Send you, or do you want me to share my screen?
Sorry about that. You should be good to share your screen now, Simone.
Got it. Okay, so I'm Simone, and I am the co-chair along with Carlene Ponder for Group 5. And our charge is researching and proposing best practices for the intersection of health, social services, and crisis response. Our meeting schedule, we've been meeting since October, and we'll meet through December 21st, I believe. And we meet on Mondays for about 90 minutes. Our outcomes that we're looking at, so we are reviewing data and information. We are already in the continuum of care portion of this, so, and also kind of mapping what existing services are out there currently for our county. And then I do have to give a shout out to Judith on, I think, day 1. We asked her to share with us just kind of best practices that are out there for this area. So mapping kind of existing services, then identifying where there are gaps. So there may be opportunities for improvement on what already exists. And then there may be opportunities for new, proposing new models, right? And then we're reviewing best practices and promising practices. And then we'll make recommendations. And we have already asked our group members to, they've already been coming up with recommendations and putting things in kind of what we're calling big ideas and small ideas. So this kind of shows our outcomes and what Group 5 based upon our charge. And that's it, you guys. So any questions or discussions?
Thank you for that presentation, Simone. Appreciate that. Any feedback or questions? Simone, you made it easy for us. I guess, guess the PowerPoint is like, you can't argue with that.
Sorry, I try to do things for both auditory and visual learners.
No, it's
you know, talking at people.
No, it's a good break in the norm. That's a virtual meeting. So I don't think I have any. Let me check the chat to see if there's any questions.
I did want to mention, and I know other groups have mentioned this too, we have talked about in our group that one of our recommendations will possibly be for, there's a plethora of programs that exist that we say we have in our county, right? But where's the data? And, how is it working, right? And then how is it working when it comes to Black and Brown people? So that may be one of our recommendations, that we have, a whole host of services, but maybe, an area that we need to look at is gathering more data on these services and how they're really functioning. So that may be an enhancement that we recommend.
Okay. So based upon that, are you able to tell us like what your discussion schedule looks like for that? I know you guys meet like every week, but just a broad surface of what you guys will be talking about over the next few weeks.
Yeah, last week, or I'm sorry, this past Monday, and when we met the previous Monday, so that was the 2nd of November, because we took a break to hear the presentation from our county's racial equity officer. We talked about prevention and intervention services. So I think we're going to be moving into the kind of post-crisis stability area. And so we're kind of, as we're talking about this continuum, we're also talking about, we're going to be reviewing before the meeting, there's the white paper that ELE4A did for us, put together. So kind of reviewing things that are on there. And every week, group members are coming with kind of big and small ideas and continuing to ask questions about what was presented in the county's report. And we have our county representatives there, so they're able to kind of respond where they're able to. And, we ask some questions. So I think we are looking at, if you, the graphic I showed, right, we have kind of these 5 or 6 outcome areas. And so I would say we are looking to maybe our last 2 meetings really just kind of move into tightening up our recommendations. So all along, we've already started with some recommendations. And so that's kind of the vein we're continuing along with looking at what buckets. And as we're going along, again, kudos to Judith. As we're making these big and small recommendations, I think she's already kind of placing them into intervention, prevention, or crisis stability modes, placing them on the continuum. So,
right.
And thank you, Edmund, for actually reminding me about that, because that is an area that we talk a lot about, yes, these services are out there, but how educated are our county residents on them? How publicized are these services? So those are other areas that we've already discussed.
Great. Any other questions, feedback, comments? All right, like I said, you guys, you made it simple. Thank you so much. So regarding, I think we're taking it over to Caroline. I think she's going to talk about the community survey on the next item of the agenda, unless anyone has any feedback or comments on what's been discussed tonight.
Yeah, I was going to say we are ahead of schedule, so we could open it up for a few additional minutes for those who may not have had an opportunity to present their question to any of the groups.
I did have one question. So our group has talked about school resource officers, and I've heard several other groups talk about it. So I'm wondering how we can facilitate collaboration between these groups to discuss mutual topics.
Good question. I think, and Mark, I would love to have you chime in as well, because I know you have a great perspective on it, but we should, it's hard to say that we are instantly collaborating, because that's not really the goal of this task force. The task force is to provide the county executive with some recommendations to reimagine public safety. And really how that all gets together in collaborative form really is beyond the mission of the group from our perspective. Once the county executive takes recommendations, he'll act accordingly. And there's also, like you said, as mentioned tonight, the school board is looking at it too, and the county council. And in theory, that's really like a political conversation that's beyond the parameters of our group. Our group is to really, as a community, come up with recommendations. If it's about the school resource officer program, come up with recommendations based upon the research, experience, and conversations that we've had. So, Mark, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, or.
Yeah, well, I want to say, it's an important question. So I think to the extent, at meetings like this where we hear about common issues, we may want the co-chairs of the focus groups may want to reach out to each other just to get a feel for what kind of analysis they're doing, what direction they are. At the very least, when we get to the point of drafting recommendations, certainly if groups 1 and 4 are working on school resource officers or anything else, we clearly need to be very consistent about what we're coming up with there. So to the extent there is overlap, we need to have some serious conversations and work through any differences of perspective at that point too. So we just need to be alert, I think, as we move along and try to facilitate the conversations as we hear that there's need to do so.
Appreciate that.
And one thing I realized I forgot to bring up, Group 1 actually made a point that I think should be, to the extent that's possible, it should be kind of touched on really throughout the rest of the focus groups, and that's the language barrier issue. I noticed that's one thing that hadn't really been specifically mentioned. Well, to lesser extent Group 2, I think they've kind of touched on it, but I really encourage somehow in your conversations to address that, because one of the questions that was mentioned during the first discussion on Group 1 was, what training is available. So, yes, we all have our focus groups to determine what goals we want to see, but we're also trying to help each other out in producing just recommendations to the county executive. So if there's a way for the groups to collaborate on that, I encourage that as well. Okay. Any other feedback, comments?
Yes. So, Bernice, I think what you had said before, I put this in chat.
Okay.
But what I think that you said before, I think it was very helpful. I like the analogy that you made about it being like a science experiment and the what if and then kind of, scenario. I too have concerns on the possibility of us as a task force spending a lot of time on what's existing and trying to understand and maybe trying to fix, instead of maybe looking at the what if and then and reimagining, because we don't have a lot of time. And we're not going to be able to go too deep with anything that we do unless we have an extension on the proposal. So that's something that I think we should challenge ourselves to do, is to not get so caught up in what's existing and let's understand it and figure it out and try to make it a little better, because we wouldn't be here if what was in existence was working. So I challenge us to think more outside the box and to explore and think of things that don't exist. And it may possibly be that there are programs or services or approaches that are being followed and led in other counties, in other states, in other countries. That's great. And maybe we could pull something from those to be a little bit bigger and larger in our thinking. But it may be something that doesn't exist, and it may be something that just seems like it could work. And I'd just like to encourage everyone to think of those things and not be afraid or feel that we need to limit ourselves in our thinking because of any of the factors that are currently at play. And I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I comment? It's Carlene Ponder.
Yes, Colleen. Yes.
Thank you so much, Karen. You raised really great points. I absolutely agree with you. In Focus Group 5 on crisis response, we are spending much of our time going over the gaps. And we've been really clear with people that there are problems already existing in Montgomery County, in the Montgomery County Police Department. We've highlighted recent police shootings, the shooting of Robert White in 2018, the shooting of Fanon Berhe in 2020, for example. Both men had mental illness that was fairly apparent to, people without the excess or extra training that police officers receive. So we're looking at prevention as part of our task because for me personally, I feel that those were two incidents where lethal force should not have been used. And if our officers are resorting to that quicker than they should be, and particularly as we talked about missing data when people on the other end are Black or brown, then we have an existing problem and we have gaps in services, gaps in training, or perhaps we're hiring the wrong people, or perhaps we're not disciplining enough and that kind of thing. So that's where we should be focused rather than just looking at what we have on paper.
Thank you, Caroline. I appreciate that because, again, that's why we're having this conversation tonight. I mean, I picked up on the word, training. And I thought, okay, well, maybe that's something, group 3 can address somehow. I mean, I know that they're a huge group with a huge task. So I hate to keep to picking on them, but this is why we're having this conversation to see how we're overlapping and how we can have a cohesive set of recommendations in January. Any other feedback, thoughts?
This is Simone. I will say I think that all of the groups, we need to make sure that we are leveraging the expertise of our consultants. So, for example, right, group 4, if you're looking at alternatives, what alternatives do they know of in their work that have worked really well? Or, where they may have been challenges or, I think these consultants are here to really assist us and accompany us on this process. And I think all the groups really need to leverage their expertise and make use of it.
Thank you. Okay, going once, going twice. All right, great conversation tonight. Caroline, go ahead and take it over.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, everyone. Just wanted to provide the group a brief update of where we are with our Reimagining Public Safety Community Input Survey. As you are aware, the survey was launched a couple of weeks ago. We really wanted to be able to provide community members an opportunity to participate in this work that is being done. Since the launch of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, we have received emails with feedback and questions, and we wanted a way to organize all of that. This task force includes 46 members. Of course, the county has a population of 1.1 million, so we wanted it to have more of a greater reach and allow people an opportunity to participate. So the survey really focused on the calls that the police department is currently responding to, as well as other services the police department is performing. We are asking residents to rate their thoughts, how they would reimagine as far as which are the calls and services that the police department should continue to do versus those that should be shared with another department or agency, or services that residents think that police really shouldn't be in the business of doing. So we're gathering all of that. We have also encouraged residents to provide feedback to the various focus areas that's being worked on. So today, it's been about 3 weeks. We received several thousands of responses, so we're really pleased. We ensured that language would not be a barrier for individuals to participate in this community input survey. I know we've had a discussion about language barrier being a barrier for individuals accessing services to the county. So the survey was provided in English as well as the top 6 languages spoken in the county, including, see if I get them all right here, French, Chinese, Amharic, Vietnamese, Korean, and there is one that I am forgetting, but it is
Spanish.
Spanish. Thank you. How could I forget that? Thank you so much, Scott. It's Spanish. So we've been really pleased with the responses that have come in. Our team has already started reviewing the responses that have come in to date. We will share feedback with the focused areas of the task force so they can review them and consider them as they are completing their work. Our goal is we have a community forum that is scheduled for December 3rd. At that time, we will provide a review of our analysis of that input to this task force as well as the community in large. So that is a quick overview of where we are with that input. So the survey is closing tomorrow. We extended it just because there was such a large turnout and more people were asking to participate. So we extended it for an additional week. It closes tomorrow. Once that's done, the heavy analysis will begin, and we'll be getting ready for our December 3rd community forum.
Carolyn, there's a question in the chat regarding from Anna Martinez. Besides email, how was the survey advertised?
Sure, the survey advertised by press release. It was also shared on the county's various social media sites. We also pushed it out through various networks throughout the county departments with our Office of Community Partnership, with our regional services directors, various county representatives, pushed it out through all of their networks. So we think it went pretty far deep considering our response rate to this survey in comparison to other surveys that we have done at the county. We have gotten a pretty good response rate to date. So we're pleased with our efforts.
Okay. Any other questions during the survey?
Yes. So I took the survey, and I'd like to share my experience or feedback just briefly. One of the things that I noticed on the survey is it was very limited with race. You had to pick just one. You couldn't be two or more. Mm-hmm. With gender, also limiting. And I like that it was anonymous. I think that people that have some concerns over their responses would be more likely to take the survey. There wasn't anything that I recall under ethnicity. I don't think that was an option. I may be wrong, but I don't think that was an option. And also, what I was wondering is what, aside from some suggestions and information that would be helpful to us, hadn't anybody considered, or do you think there would be consideration on a follow-up survey, because our focus is on reimagining public safety and it's specifically out of concerns for Black and Brown communities? I'd like to see a more targeted survey, or at the very least more targeted questions on that survey that would provide more insight for us. And some of those questions, for example, would be such as, do you trust the police? Do you trust government services and programs? Are you likely or not likely to call a government agency or the police if you might be in need? And if not, why is that? Can you explain? Those were the kinds of things that I thought would be very, very helpful for us to know as a group and as, Montgomery County government, because it seems like these surveys, while it can be helpful in some ways, in other ways, it's just scratching the surface on the issue of racial equity, particularly for Black and Brown communities. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thanks, Karen, for your feedback on that. One of the things we were cognizant of is in producing this survey, we did not want to duplicate questions that's asked on a prior survey. The county does a government survey of every 2 years, biannually. And some of the questions that you ask regarding, do you trust the police? You didn't ask, are you safe in your neighborhood? But there are some questions that is asked on that survey. And since that survey was done not too long ago, we already have that data available. So we did not want to duplicate that. So that's why some of that was not on this. So, but I hear what you're saying, that we may want to think about how to share the data from that survey with this group.
Yes, because that survey that you're referring to, I believe that's a much longer survey. It's not targeted specifically on public safety and the police. And that's why I had thought that it would be very effective and insightful now, as we are going through this process of reviewing racial equity and reimagining for public safety, because of the racial inequities that impact Black and Brown residents.
Well, we do have the community forum. I believe it's December 3rd, and I think we're still, I think, figuring out the agenda for that. But to your point, what the survey doesn't encompass everything, but hopefully we can kind of catch what we see that the gaps are, through that forum possibly, to get the information we can in order to make the recommendations. We only have 60 days. I see we're close on time, so I'll kind of wrap us up. We have 60 days, literally, from today to get these recommendations done. So by our next meeting, after the community forum on December 3rd, by the time we have our meeting, we really should decide, have our recommendations in the process of being done, or at least identify how you want them written out. Our consultants are available to help us, to either help us draft them or guide us as to how to draft them. And remember, this is a community voice. So whether they write or not, it's still our voices are going to be heard in these recommendations. So with that, I think I've covered everything else tonight in terms of how broad we were reaching out, or how broad we're discussing reimagining public safety. That's been kind of addressed tonight, which I'm very excited to see the progress. And yeah, for any meeting schedules, just make sure if you don't know the meeting schedule offhand, don't hesitate to email us so we can help you keep track of when the meetings are. I know it's a lot of emails, a lot of meetings. So we're happy to help you keep track of when all the meetings are so you guys can stay involved after these large task force meetings. So with that, I have nothing else. I think we're good to go unless I'm missing anything, Caroline or Mark.
Thank you. Good.
Well,
thanks, Bernice. Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Good night.
Educational enrichment and equity hubs. The funding was proposed by Councilmember Craig Rice, who chairs the Council's Education and Culture Committee.
And so it was incredibly important for us, understanding that we're in a distance learning model now, that we needed to do more for these families, for these children, making sure that they had the ability to get the additional help that's needed, the additional resources,